All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is Skylar. I'm an autosexual trans woman, and I'm documenting my experience in a conservative Christian small group called Freedom Group. Welcome to my series on freedom groups at the chapel. The theme of these videos is really about understanding my emotional journey through figuring out how to be part of this community, or at least understand their perspectives. And my goal is really to help other people, encourage other people to see the value of staying open-minded, even in challenging environments. If you're new to the series, please make sure to check out my previous episodes and don't forget to like and subscribe. So, I'm a little bit sad to say that this is going to be the final episode of my Freedom Group experience. I've attended 5 sessions in total out of the 12, and I've been determined to stick it out as long as possible. Throughout the journey, there's been highs and lows. I've learned so much about myself all through this journey. I've learned a lot about freedom in Christ, at least from this group's perspective. And needless to say, I've been pretty proud of myself for sticking it out and making it this far. And it wasn't until this past week that I realized that this 5th session was really going to be my last session. So really, the story starts with, towards the end of the week, I got another text message from one of the leaders. They asked to talk with me over the phone, and so we chatted later that day. Basically, this leader called to explain to me that the remaining sessions of the experience, basically the second half of this series, we're all going to be fundamentally split up into subgroups of men and women, basically from the start of each session. So the entire time would be spent in these sex-based groups. Now, I'm saying they, it was really just one of them I was talking to here, which was actually a positive in my book because, it's a lot more comfortable to talk to someone one-on-one than it is to talk 1v2 necessarily. But again, I'm just going to say they to just refer in a sex agnostic way because I don't want to say anything sensitive about the leaders in this situation. But basically, they referred back, to the prior discussions about the problems with me going into either specific group and again, wanting to offer me a third solution. So I guess the previous conversation was really about the prayer sessions at the end of each session where we break off and go and pray with leaders. That was meant to, guide me back to praying with those 2 leaders so that, I wouldn't be praying with the girls anymore. That was basically what they really wanted to do there. And then now they're saying they're going back to now we needed a solution again because these groups are going to be completely split up by sex. And so to recap, they couldn't put me with the girls because, again, of my biological sex and the significance that this curriculum places on that. And that in similar vein to that, it would betray the trust of those female members if they ever found out about my male biological sex. Because just simply put, they're likely to not view me as a woman, at least in the same way because of my biological sex, which I completely understand too. I recognize that, it makes sense. I'm not a female. I am a trans woman. I get that. I respect that, especially in a space like this where it's, everything is basically based around sex. I mean, just for lack of a better term. At least the whole framing of what they're going to construct for what you're supposed to do. That's how it kind of goes from. That's where it manifests, is your biological sex. So again, I completely understand that. But likewise, the problem with going with the boys is that, for lack of better terms, practically it would out me to the group. And they're very clear that the group does not know that I'm trans in general. And it, I completely understand that. It makes sense. They don't. There's no signs of that. Just the leaders know here. And that, so they don't want to put me with the boys for that reason. But also, the other aspect here is that it could make the group of men more uncomfortable just to have me there. They may know that I'm trans and that means I'm biologically male, but it's absolutely one-sided to say that the markers and signals that I emit from my phenotype, which is basically describing my physical manifestation of feminine characteristics, would not disrupt to some degree the ability for those men to be vulnerable. They may be less likely to open up about particular sexual struggles that they might be having, things like that, where it's like, if I'm not there, there's just no layer of disruption possible there. So it's like, maybe that helps the guys out a little bit more too. I don't know. I mean, maybe they'd be fine with me there and there wouldn't be any difference. But it's hard for me to really know because that's not going to happen here. So they indicated in this discussion, they indicated that they wanted to give me another meaningful path forward that made the most sense with all of these different various considerations. Basically, for the rest of the sessions, they said that they would be willing to meet with me, or at least two leaders of the group would be willing to meet with me on a weekly basis and work through the rest of the curriculum, like one-on-one, well, in this case, one-on-two with, these leaders. And so like it prompted me to ask for clarification. I'm like, do you mean I wouldn't even be going to these, freedom group sessions anymore? And they were like, yes, this is correct. You would no longer be attending these group sessions, but you would meet with us at like the same cadence in the early evening each day. And basically, there might be one more session. I think they said like there's like one more session at the end of the whole freedom group series that's like a recap session that I think maybe is the whole group again together. But basically every other one is like one-on-one split. So basically, it didn't make any more sense for me to go and participate in this group anymore. And I thought something they did that was kind of funny during this discussion with me was like they framed the dialogue with the leadership. So there's like the church leadership and then there's like them. And they were like, yeah, like, they sort of framed it as originally when they were talking about it, the idea would be that I'd have a rotating set of leaders that I would meet with each week, and that they advocated that I should meet with just them week out and week out so that it builds that vulnerability and that sense of trust better, which honestly I appreciated because that is true. You need the same person to sort of build something, you can't restart each week. That doesn't really work. But also keep in mind that it just so happens that this leader was also the same person who was like dropping the he hymns for me constantly in the prayers. And like, I get it because that's how this leader is thinking and framing what they think God's version of freedom is for me. That's the key context here. Again, it's reading the context to understand what's going on here. And that was something I really had to kind of do. That I'm not really used to doing, honestly. It's just, I don't need to pay attention that much to the small things, really, usually. But I did in this case because it was so hard to get anything outright about what's the leader's disposition to my trans identity. But it comes out in just a little bit, and this is going to be something I unpack for a little bit here. But basically, they advocated for this, and that, what it would mean is that I just would no longer be a part of the group dynamic in this experience. And I realized in that moment that this was probably going to be the end for me. I mean, I signed up for Freedom Group specifically in a, double, all gendered group. So like there was no clear male or female group. It was clearly for couples, this group, not knowing that it was going to morph into this dichotomous gendered group. So seeing, I did kind of get cues of that earlier in, but I didn't realize it was such a substantial volume of this experience. If it was just one or two sessions, then I could work with that. But this is like another 5 to 6 sessions. Like this is over a month of doing this. And I'm like, I'm not here I'm here to be a part of the experience, to be a part of the group experience specifically. That's what I wanted. But like, things I'm trying to do in my life now is like I'm trying not to just rush to a decision. So I didn't tell this person that I was gonna exit the group. I just said, I need the weekend to pray about this. I need time to explore this with God. And so that's what I did. I prayed with God over the weekend to see, what is he telling me? How do I feel about this? Like, what are all the considerations going in here? And, well, come Sunday, that's when our conversation continues. I just felt a really deep sense of peace that I do think was from God in this, saying that, yes, it's time to exit. It's okay. You can go. And so again, finally on Sunday, I called the leader back, and they had already texted me like, hey, we haven't heard from you. And I was like, yeah, I'll admit because they had talked to me on Friday and now this was Sunday. So I think they were expecting to hear back sooner. But I wanted the full amount of time to just pray and digest what this decision would mean. And so, yeah, I reached that point on Sunday, and now I'm calling them to talk and explain through, because I know they're going to ask. I would expect them to. And sure enough, that happens. And so I did kind of want to stress, like, just because of the way they framed the future of this group experience for me, or really it's just the freedom experience, I guess at this point, I can't even say group. That's just it. I wasn't even really quitting the group now. I'm just quitting the expectation that I'm going to meet with these 2-on-1 discussions with this particular set of leaders. That was actually what I was quitting, because I wasn't even, permitted to like go into the group unless it was like, I guess in the context of the guys, but it was just kind of a mutual understanding that that's not a really good fit here. Which I respect, I'm not out here to, make trouble. That's what I'm trying to say. And so, because that was really, again, that was the choice they offered me, 2-on-1 discussions with leaders from here on out on a different night than the actual Freedom Group night, which I liked the Freedom Group night because I had specifically picked it because it was available in my schedule consistently. So that was just a more practical problem. But, okay, whatever. I could be flexible and make it work. But, seeing as that it was going to be a 2-on-1 dynamic, I felt like I say this in the chat with them. I'm like, this reads to me like therapy. Like, this sounds like therapy. And it's like, I'm not here. I didn't sign up for therapy. That wasn't at all. I didn't even have problems going into this. So I definitely don't want like therapy, because then that's just looking for problems like super outright, like just like putting a spotlight on your past to try to like find problems. Which I just, I'm happy to do an exercise on that, but I think I'm in a very healthy place. So I don't feel motivated to go searching for, problems to give post hoc rationalizations on why I am the way I am. Like, that's nothing I'm looking for here. So, but that prompted the leader right away to kind of speak up and be like, no, like, this isn't what it's going to be like. It's not going to be like therapy. If anything, it'll be like a 1-on-1 session because my partner works and is not going to be available. And so like for a lot of our sessions, so it would really be just more 1-on-1. And I was like, okay, well, still 1-on-1 with the leader that's like he, him, all about me, and it's like, all right, great, cool. I'll concede. Maybe counseling is the right word here. Like thinking in my brain, like, okay, therapy obviously was too strong. Now counseling might be the better word, but it doesn't matter. I wasn't looking for counseling here in the first place. I was looking for really more like friendship and just trying to understand better what it is that this Freedom Group experience is about, which I think at 5 sessions, a little over a month, I was really starting to get it around my head what this group was gonna, aim to do as part of their goals. And so that was problem one. It was that I wasn't after counseling or therapy in this context, which I guess it would be more like counseling because of 1-on-1, less therapeutic, I guess, in a way, whatever, really, because it's like, I can see the dynamics, maybe my word choice is not perfect, but we all kind of know what's going on here. And so problem 2 was that I described I was feeling rather disingenuous going through this experience and having them pray for me to find a deeper identity in Christ, all while using those male pronouns for me. I just really had a way of making things clear that like what the agenda is here. And that like, for me, I have such a heart of openness and sort of like a childlike wonder when it comes to God, because there's just so much I don't understand about him, but he's so good. And like, that's sort of part of my true north is that, being open-minded and seeking to embody that perpetually and not feel like I know everything and apply like righteous judgment. Like that's not, that's all kind of part of how I see the paradigm of being a Christian and following Christ. But that's not the shared value set here. It became very clear to me that that's not the case. Not to mention that the burden of the leadership constantly having to deal with me, like I'm a problem. Like that was very much how I felt in the way that they handled my trans identity. I mean, they brought it up to me. They made it a problem that they also were seeking to solve. And it's just like, I guess what they don't realize is that basically any other group I'd go to, it would never have been a problem because people just simply wouldn't know. And so it's like, it's so eye-opening to see the reactions of how they try to navigate this. Again, they tried. They gave it their best, and I want to extend that grace to them. But it doesn't mean I'm not a human and I don't have feelings about how I'm being treated. And also, like, the fact is that, I mean, I was getting these signals that I was a problem right away when they confronted me. And they were sending me text messages saying, we have to meet with you before this next freedom group. And then, the application of that is like, you can't go and pray with the girls anymore. You got to come pray with us two leaders. It was just so much exception orientation on like how this is going. Like we have to frame all these exceptions for you, Skylar. And like, I know it wasn't their intent to make me feel like a burden, but inevitably that's how it's going to feel, especially when there's so much construction around how they're treating you. And it's not even particularly great treatment. So again, it came from a good place, but ultimately it was just weird. Especially because like when it came to the whole prayer thing at the end of each session, so at the end of the sessions, like again, people would break out and the leaders would go to corners of the room, sometimes outside, sometimes to another room and pray one-on-one. But it would always be sort of organic and you would just kind of get up and go as like your turn, as when a leader was free and you could take your turn. But once they started doing this whole prayer thing with me, it became this reoccurring pattern of as soon as we break to pray at the end, the two of the leaders would like summon me and be like, Skylar, come on. And it was like, all right, like I'm first again, like, so I, first after that third session. And then each time it was like, pray with me first, and then they'll like splinter and go and pray for other people. But it just had a way of still calling attention to me getting prayer with just the two of them. And granted, it's a husband and wife, so that, is shielding me, I guess, from like, why is Skylar praying with boys? And then they're not going to let me pray with girls. So again, this was their way of compromising, but the execution of it wasn't organic. And at the end of the day, it kind of just felt like I was part of their regiment. Like, okay, now it's your turn to come up, pray. And then, and then it's just so awkward because after you're prayed for, you don't really have a space to like go easily. So I would just kind of leave. And I also was like ready to leave. Cause after going and then praying with people and then having them, he needs to find his identity in Christ. He needs to do this. And then the other person sort of echoing similar sentiment. Maybe without the pronouns. I don't think both of them did. I think it was just one. It like just had a way of being like, yeah, this is a lot for me. Because like, but the point is that I'm feeling disingenuous because I'm not agreeing with the value set that they have at the end of this prayer. So even though my prayers are very open and generic, like, God, help me get the most out of this experience. Help me embody the virtues of Christ in his love for us and what this means. They're on another level when it comes to like narrowing that down specifically and mentioning things like trauma, which again, I really do not share that value of like, I am traumatized. I had an incredible childhood. I was blessed beyond measure with my parents. Like, even though they reacted horribly to my transition, they loved me. They still love me. And I see this and I know this is true. And that is why it doesn't mean I can't have moments of difficulty or, problems of dealing with things in my past. I certainly do. But it's a false notion to go back and use those to explain who I am today in like those particular ways of struggle. And so that is like where, that's just where it kind of gets like, hard to really like see what they're thinking here. But I get it. Like other people, that's probably a lot more true for, and it is still a healthy thing to consider always how past events could shape who you are. I'm not going to say that can't ever work. It's just not the case for me. It's really just a consistent pattern over time of difficulty that I've had that's sort of endogenous to me. And so anyways, back to the conversation. During this conversation where I was explaining my exit to the group, the leader opened up and shared a personal connection, an experience they had connected to the LGBT community that they had experienced firsthand to show me, to like help show their empathy toward me specifically. I'm not going to go into any details about this out of respect, but I did appreciate that they shared this with me. I know they did it to show similarity and build empathy. And honestly, it did sort of, I guess, make me feel, I don't want to say make me feel better. It just kind of was like, oh, okay. You've had an experience with this, at least tangential to the LGBT community. I appreciate you sharing that. But and this here comes in the butt, is that ironically, what it did tell me in the subtext, the subtext here is that it became clear that they were going to have very strong opinions on matters of sexuality and identity because it's personal to them. And so that tells me enough already. Okay, this person has a lot of conviction around these topics, which tends to not be a good fit for me. I guess you could say I have a lot of convictions, but I, again, strive to have this open-mindedness and detachment from my own identity. So it's not like I let that dictate my social interactions. But I'm not everyone. And most people that have strong opinions on these things, it does very much influence their interactions and viewpoints around these topics. And then the corollary to that realization was that their viewpoint would fundamentally be a part of the expectation as to what I should experience when it comes to finding freedom in God. In particular, if their experience was breaking from that part of themselves in their journey of finding God, then the same thing would be applied to me, in really just projected onto me, even though, again, their described experience was definitely not the same thing as me. Like, they weren't saying they were trans or dealing with that. So again, it's like, yeah, I just knew that these were like sort of the manifestations, the way that this would go. And so the leader also said something in this closing discussion with me that was particularly eye-opening. And this is what I want to focus mostly on, because this is the little tidbit that reveals what this person thinks about being transgender or what trans identity means. And they indicated that in my identity as being trans, I would always be at war with my body. This was finally it. Finally something concrete that reveals and exposes the reality of what they think about, I guess, trans identity or medical transition. And wow, it made me think a lot. It really struck me in the moment. I was like, oh my goodness, that's the disposition. Interesting. I was just like, really just more thinking like around it, like that's so fascinating. Okay, let me unpack this a little bit. So that's what I did in writing, in framing my video for this, on like what I would speak about. And let me just say, first of all, there's an element of truth to that. I'm not going to say that they're outright wrong. I mean, you can make a pretty good case for that, at least in the literal sense, because I have to take estrogen in order to remain feminized, or at least to some extent remain feminized. I mean, I've already had procedures, and I don't need to do anything like for like surgical things to continue those. But when it comes to the things hormones can do, it's true. I would have to continue taking estrogen. And that could be said as being like at war with my natural body, because if my natural body wants to produce testosterone and I'm taking estrogen, then I'm at war with like the hormonal nature of my body. You could say that. So I wanted to, recognize the merit of where this person might be coming from in the most literal sense, because that resonates. That makes sense. You could even extrapolate that to being like, I'm at war with the way I'm perceived. Like if people think I'm, if they think I'm a woman and then I say I'm biologically male, I'm transgender, and then all of a sudden they start treating me as male, and now I'm at war with that social expectation of what they're applying on me. even that has some merit. Like I can resonate with that. The only downside for that one, or the only like really like piece that I would say against that, is that I don't fundamentally care all that much if I'm perceived as male. I care more about how I'm treated around that subject. So it's not really like trying to hide that I'm male. It's trying to shield the mistreatment of what that means to people when it's like falsely projected onto me. Because they might think men are supposed to be tough or something, and then, try to like force that expectation onto me. I don't know. I'm not really super thought out on all that, but I just know that those are kind of the two supportive arguments, we'll say, on being at war with myself. And so like, I guess what I would say to the whole like HRT thing too is like, I knew that I would be having to take HRT to transition, and still know that to this day. Like it's very much something you have to continue to do. And so you're connected to the medical industry perpetually on this. But it's to me, it's like taking insulin for diabetes, or like a diabetic taking insulin. Except instead of diabetes, I just have gender dysphoria. And I'll also have to admit that gender dysphoria is a much harder phenomenon to measure objectively. And so I have to admit that it's not as concrete of a disorder psychologically, because it's a psychological disorder, rather than something that's more measurable and you can see like a lack of insulin in the body, and that's clear to see. So I'll give, those caveats, but to me, it is the same relationship as a diabetic taking insulin. And so what really struck me though is just how that way of thinking, of being at war with my body, is so foreign to me in my day in, day out, everyday life, in my regular experience. It's like, because I feel the exact opposite of that. It's like every day I feel so at peace with who I am and what my body looks like. I've manifested through transition, I've manifested a physicality that reflects my persistent mental experience. And this is what it comes back to at the end of the day. I have no regrets with my transitioning, and always strive to remain open-minded that maybe one day, just maybe, I'll have to detransition, or something will happen and I'll need to detransition. And that becomes the rational decision for me. That day is not today. I don't expect that day to ever come, but I'm not prideful enough to claim that who I am today is who I'll always be, etc., etc. Like I don't know the future. But I do know that if I was to detransition, I wouldn't regret a single thing that I have done today. I know that is true because of that persistent mental experience that's connected to my sexuality. It's connected to my psychology. And it's all I've ever really known. And that's why I'm not worried about these treatments, I guess, I don't know, derailing some future goal to be male. I don't ever really see that being a goal of mine. It would just be a different way of coming to peace. But I like the way I've come to peace. It's great. It's exactly what I always thought would be the case. But again, had to really probe and parse that out to be confident in that decision. And it's so true to the degree that like I will actually regularly thank God in prayers with him for letting me be born in a time period where there's such viable medical treatment for my type of mental health condition, my suffering and gender dysphoria, and that transition is so accessible and available and helpful to people like me. I actually even think it's probably a little too accessible in our current era, especially for trans youth, or I should say gender questioning youth, when it comes to gender dysphoria, where you probably do need a little bit more of a barrier and guidelines to work out those feelings. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm just grateful that it's here at all. And that's really my North Star on that. Okay, so I want to return back to that statement one more time, just the power of it. As long as I'm trans, I'm at war with my body. It's funny because that was exactly how I felt before I made the decision to transition roughly over 5 years ago. I couldn't find peace with myself no matter what I tried. And I tried a lot of things, everything from immersing myself in social activities, staying busy all the time as much as I could, to like things like binge drinking, and really just doing anything to distract myself. Lots of reading, tons of material on the psychology of morality, figuring out like sexology, figuring out, what are the characteristics that make someone decide to choose transition, and like, how do I fit in this? And is this something I want for my life? What do the two paths look like? Me as male, me as female, or something in between? Also, while knowing I can't actually become female. That's always an important anchor in how this is all conceptualized, is that transition does not mean you actually make it from point A all the way to point B. It means you go from point A and you could land somewhere. You will land somewhere before point B, but you could be really close to it. You could be, in some cases, unfortunately, a little bit more in the middle and not so close to it. But you'll never actually be point B. And that's something to always remember, that you cannot truly change your, full biological sex. And I think that's a healthy way to think about this. And so connected to all of this, I used to be terribly upset that God made me this way, in the sense that like I was a person with gender dysphoria, mostly because I knew that there was no perfect solution to it. Again, you cannot change biological sex. So that's a very strong limitation to remember about this. I was frustrated that God made me an autosexual person. I was frustrated that God made me a bisexual person. I was also frustrated that God gave me this complex psychology that is wired to imagine myself as the opposite sex just to have sexual intimacy. It's like, it's a frustrating experience. It's the essence of the experience. It's really the excruciating dissatisfaction that comes with how my life would look and feel if it was naturally lived out without medical intervention. Basically, if I was to become a man, how difficult that life looked, what that life looked like for me, and how badly I didn't want that life. I really didn't want it. And so, and then just the whole thing about me being bisexual, just like that whole layer of guys and girls and dealing with that type of confusion about like, who should I partner with? On top of having sexual energy already directed inward. So like, there's just a lot of strange wiring going on up here, that I had to work through and deal with on an incremental basis when it came to decision making. And it used to feel like for me that my sexuality felt more like a birth defect. Like I was born with some mismatch, that I just could never really fully rectify. Like there was no way to solve it. And that often, like, one of the other sad things about this is that it just often acts to displace your presence from the actual intimacy of the moment. When you need to cognitively disassociate from your body in order to have intimacy with someone else, that's like an extra layer to work through. And so I really wanted to get rid of that extra layer. I wanted to experience life directly in a connection to my environment in a way that wasn't blocked by something. And that's exactly what gender dysphoria is it's like a blockade. It's like a metaphysical blockade that, I agree you can kind of work on it mentally, but ultimately you can't get rid of it and you have to treat it. And it's about how you want to mitigate the effects of it. That's what transition allows for. And so, basically, I think gender dysphoria now, I've come to see it more in a dualistic sense. I think it's one of the worst curses someone can have, but it can also be one of the deepest motivations to explore the intricacies of our world. It can motivate you to push past boundaries that most won't need to do or most won't do. But its curse is, once again, that you can't fully change your biological sex. And I do think the truest peace comes from accepting that fact. But again, it's got its positives too. My dysphoria, it pushed me to explore new experiences that I may not otherwise have sought out. It pushed me towards understanding how things really work in our world from a functional perspective, not just taking what I'm told at face value. It also expanded my ability to think from the perspective of the opposite sex, helping me deconstruct and examine situations in a more multifaceted way. It's given me an empathy and connection with those that have also experienced prolonged suffering in their life. It's given me purpose in something unique to share with people, especially with gender questioning individuals. And so I want to return one last time to that statement. As long as I'm trans, I'm at war with my body. I think why I love this statement so much, or like this positioned viewpoint, is that it really dives back to why did I transition in the first place? What was my motivation? Was I seeking an escape from my biological sex identity, from that reality of my biological sex? The answer is both yes and no, in my opinion. I did want to escape from my male sex characteristics that I felt confined in my body. That is absolutely true. But I didn't actually want to run away from the fact that I am biologically male. I am extremely okay with that realization or with that reality, but I still want to look and act and move and otherwise function in this world like a woman would. That is still true for me. And that trying at that or manifesting that is what I believe the healthier direction for my life. I don't think that's for everyone, and I think it's very fringe on who really benefits from this. But I do think that there is something to say about the essence of the benefits that you can have in this. And so ultimately, what really motivated my decision to transition? And I know what it was. It was to experience peace, to experience life without thinking about what it would be like to live as the opposite sex all the time, what it would be like to see the feminized version of myself in the mirror that I had already conjured up in my mind for basically as long as I can remember, at least since the young age of like 6 to 8, which again is basically my earliest memories. And really it's to put closure to the thoughts of what it would be like to finally express my femininity outwardly in a female-like body. It was to put an end to the rumination of how affirming it feels to be treated as a woman by the people around me in my life, to cease having to imagine myself as female, to engage intimately, to remove that barrier in my moments of intimacy with my partner, to finally feel like I'm in the body that I should have been in from the start. Of course, all within the healthy understanding that these treatments can be a one-way street and that I will never fully become female, and that there are technically additional risks to prolonged treatment of estrogen in a male body, and to accept the fact that this could have very real implications on my life later on. I don't know. We don't know everything about this yet, but it would be foolish to say that there's no such thing as heightened risks. And so accepting those limitations and that people around you will probably see you, well, some people will always see you for your biological sex if they know this about you, I think does become the ultimate grounding force in the anchors for making and navigating the decisions of within transition. So ultimately, I guess you could say, I was really grateful that the leader said this, because it helped me unpack all of this and parse this for myself, but it also gave me that much more closure, just that much more confidence in ending and exiting this experience. It gave me that much more clarity that our value systems were not going to be aligning here. Because with a belief like that they're sharing, there's no way that I'm going to change their mind in a dialogue. It would only happen through friendship. And to be fair, this person was in a position of life where I'm not going to have that effect on them. And that's understandable. That's okay. They're not the person I'm trying to reach. Just like I'm not the person, well, maybe I am the kind of person they're trying to reach. I don't know. If so, then I'm sorry, because, I don't want to say like it was failure here, but like, I'm not in the group anymore. So, take it for whatever it is you want to make of that. But so finally, our discussion began to draw to a close. The rest of the points made by the leader were fairly straightforward to me, and I had really absolutely no issue with. The first was like, our spirit has no gender, but our body and soul do. And well, I don't really have like strong opinions on that framework particularly. And if anything, I'm not really sure about the soul part not having or the soul part having a gender. But again, the whole framework was kind of wonky to me anyways. I usually just think in the terms of body and soul, more or less. And I think like body has a gender, soul doesn't. But in this case, soul and body do, according to the leader. Whatever, though, I'm not very opinionated on that. So if they want to think that, that's fine. I didn't really have an issue there. But the next thing they said was like, when we become a disciple of Christ, ultimately we follow Christ. Yes. Okay, great. I 100% wholeheartedly agree with that, with no issues at all. That's great. There's no problem there. That's what I was sort of thinking was our true north from the start of this whole thing. So why does that extend out into these areas that, why do we have these issues otherwise, that is like related to me being in this group? Well, it's their manifestations of what they think it means to follow Christ, and the difference for me of what I think it means to follow Christ. And again, that was like that whole following Christ notion was a key reason in why I started to do this freedom group experience in the first place. Just responding to God's call to participate in this experience and to share on what that's like. So we end up moving towards the end of the call here, and I did have just one more request to ask of them. I asked if I could come to this last session, session 6, just for a short bit at the beginning, just to say my goodbyes to some of the other participants in the group. Basically, I mentioned that I would want to do this at the start of the session, before things kind of get going. So we'd probably start with our prayer, and then I would say something and then exit. But it would really just be to say goodbye to a couple of the other people in the experience and to encourage others to lean in to their participation to maximize their experience. And just politely inform that it was time for me to exit after some personal disagreements. Just again, trying to dampen the, distraction element, but amplify the encouragement to be a part of this group. And I really wanted to just say goodbye to particularly some of the women that had been friendly with me at the start of the group, and just kind of give them closure about why I'm not there anymore, which I thought, would be nice. Okay, so, honestly, saying this on the call, I actually already thought this would be fine to do already, but I thought it would just be more respectful, since I was talking with the leader right there, just to ask to be totally sure, right? Because it's right there, and I'm double thinking about what's going on here, so I'm like, okay, I better ask, and so I do. The leader also agreed that this should be totally fine, but wanted to double check with the other leaders, because there are a whole group of leaders, and wanted to double check before giving me a decisive yes. So that totally made sense to me. Gotcha. And so we ended our discussion, and that was that. Now, finally, a few hours later, I get a text message from them again saying that the consensus of the leaders was actually different. They said it would be distracting if I came and left. Instead, they offered me the email addresses of all the leaders and, encouraged me to send them any thoughts or feedback that I had. So needless to say, that was the absolute nail in the coffin, so to speak, about, at least that gave me that final, hoorah on supporting my confidence in the decision to exit this experience. I thought, okay, perhaps some might find it distracting, someone arriving and leaving, some participants might dwell on that a little bit during the session. That's possible, I guess. But ultimately, really thinking about it, do we really think that me leaving at the start of the session is going to impede the participation here all that much? Honestly, if I was describing this on how I think this decision was made, it honestly smells of fear, and fear in what I might say, and fear in that I might say something that makes them look bad, despite me saying to the leader that I would be advocating for increased participation in the experience. Right there, that shows me that they don't trust me. That is what I got from that. Totally clear signal. Granted, I see where they're coming from, but I'm really glad that I got that feedback, because that was that final element to tell me that, again, they don't really trust me in this. And so, again, I want to emphasize, I never once demonstrated hostility. I always remained cordial and subject to what they would prefer. And I've always sought to give the most charitable takes on the various milestones that I've had in this experience, just trying to extend grace as much as possible to the people in this group, especially the leaders. But instead, now at the end of this experience, I have it as part of my story to say that I was rejected, literally rejected, from attending this last session. Of course, I could email the leaders, but that's not really what I wanted to do here. That wasn't the point. I wasn't looking to vent or offer up nuanced critiques. That's not even what I was going to do when I went to say goodbye. Email would be the avenue for being impersonal and articulate, but again, that's not what I was hoping to do here. I wanted to personally say goodbye to the group, and specifically those few ladies that I had chatted with and were particularly friendly with me at the start of this experience. I also really wanted to emphasize the value in immersing yourself in this experience to maximize the takeaways from it. That is what I was doing all the way through to this point. And even though it was really hard for me, I still think that's how I got the most out of it, and how I'm like at the point I am today was through pressing into this experience. So I'm really sad to say, like, now I'm just kind of left a little bit disappointed in the leadership's response, and equally that much more satisfied in my departure. All in all, I still think it was a really good experience. I learned so much about myself through this journey. I learned so much, again, about conservatives and how they treat LGBT people. I am still an advocate for most people to try out something like this, but I would strongly caution anybody that is LGBT before going into this, mostly because I think the interpretation adopted by the authority in this program is a bit narrow-minded. Just personally, that's where I'm coming from here. And I mean, I think LGBT people could go through this, but it would probably be really psychologically tough because it basically forces you to deal with this constant social pressure to conform to what the group thinks is God's will for you and what freedom looks like for you. It's just like a massive amount of projection at the end of the day. Going through this, that's what you're going to find. Ultimately, though, I think I've been a good stress test on this experience. Overall, I think more often than not, at least for the average person who probably doesn't have this like insane psychological need to challenge themselves, at least as rigorously as I do, this would probably be a good experience. In particular, though, I think if the person is struggling with like more of the conventional struggles in life, things like addiction, alcoholism, drug abuse, difficulties parenting, marital relationship issues, crippling anxiety or depression, social anxiety, especially, or even like sexual issues like pornography. Well, all of those types of struggles, the things that you could pull away from the Bible and have a very clear case on sort of what God's stance is on that. I think those are a fantastic fit for people going through this experience. I think that is where I could really see people thriving and coming out of this with a lot of good energy and really profound freedom and life transformation in God. I do think that's possible here, especially because of how great these people are. But I have to say, for me, I am so glad to have this experience behind me. Although I will miss how much it made my normal life easy. It's funny. I was at dinner talking with some friends about this a little bit, but when you have one night a week where you're around people that would not affirm you, or at least would start being weird and using your name constantly, and then possibly projecting he, him pronouns on you once they learn that you're trans, well, it just makes the rest of your week feel so easy because you don't have to deal with this type of negative treatment all that much. I guess at the start of this whole thing, I would have said that all that negativity was just in my head. And honestly, it mostly was. But as I've gone through this, I've only had more and more examples to affirm those initial expectations I had from the start. So I really don't think it's just in my head anymore. I'm just grateful that in my regular life, I can just exist and interact without gender ever being a big deal. This is what transition is supposed to be about. And ultimately, I think good people recognize this and understand that. Live and let live, so to speak. And so this will be my final video on the series. While it's clear that I've learned so much about myself and this group, ultimately, this experience illuminated the stark divide between my personal identity as a trans woman and this group's framework for faith and freedom, and that God essentially requires you to live as your biological sex, I guess. That was sort of like, at least the pressure was towards that. I don't know if they would come out and say that's exactly what it looks like, but I'm sure that the closer you are to that prescription, the more they're going to affirm you. So I do think that's where they're going with this. And I will say, despite the challenges and my eventual decision to step away, really at the point, again, where I was already not going to be able to participate in the group anymore, I'm grateful for the clarity and confidence I gained in knowing who I am and what I stand for. Ultimately, this experience reminded me of the importance of staying firm in what I know to be true, even in environments that push back against my existence or ways of thinking. My hope is that by documenting this process, others, especially those navigating similar conflicts in their social spaces, can feel encouraged to engage, question, and learn from uncomfortable spaces while maintaining their own sense of self-worth and integrity. While my time with the Freedom Group has come to a close, officially come to a close, the lessons from this chapter will undoubtedly carry forward into my ongoing exploration of identity, faith, and personal growth. I'm not done. I'll have more to share on, but I'm excited to take my channel to new chapters and new subjects as I seek to put myself out there online and follow God's command to live outwardly and to be an inspiration and help and hope to others. God bless and take care.